Um, Brittney, you can, if you go to the top of the, what you mean when you're in full screen?
Hmm.
Yeah, if you go up to the top of your Zoom screen, you should be able to, like that little green tab that dips down, you should be able
Yeah.
to mouse over that and find the chat. But I can also do the chat, so,
Yeah. Would you
okay.
mind?
Nope, not
Yeah.
at all. Okay.
Maybe not seeing
Um,
the.
so we've got a lot of folks who are talking about working on, so we've got a lot of doings, some readings, visual, listening, seeing, and doing. Nikki says reading, take notes, discussing. A couple like solving a real problem, so something that's maybe something authentic. You feel like you're involved in an authentic experience.
Mhm.
Um, Tactile experiences. So definitely a lot of active learners here.
Okay, that sounds good. Um, okay, so some of the examples that I thought you guys might have come up with were maybe listening, listening to people like talk about whatever you are interested in learning about, um, writing or reading, as with maybe you've seen like posters in parks or just like reading a informational book about whatever you want to learn and or being hands-on, which apparently a lot of you really like being hands-on and like being, as Annie said, tactile learners. So these three ways of learning are like connected to the three modalities of learning that you all may have heard about before. Um, yeah, so it's very interesting to think about the way people learn, and I think that can definitely inform how you teach. So getting to the story part of this webinar, I will give you my introduction to the environment. So as you know, my name is Brittney Thompson. I'm a TA in a couple of these MOOC courses, but I was born in Jamaica, and that really informed the way that I like think about the environment. And just like as my beginning, it's kind of like where I began like learning informally. I moved to the US when I was 5. And then, like most other students in the US academic system, I wasn't really learning as tactilely, as if that's a word, as I would have if I were in Jamaica. So it was a lot of just sitting in a classroom and reading a thing and just really waiting for the day to be over so I could go home. Yeah, so that's like the beginning of my formal education. Um, you know, I didn't really spend a lot of time outside, but I was always a quiet person. So there was always that kind of inquisitive, like trying to figure out the how the world works in me. So that was my beginning. Then a couple years down the road, I came to Cornell. And it's very different from Jamaica and just Georgia, where I used to live. I mean, as you can see by this photo, very cold, very different things to deal with. But I realized that with this Cornell education, that's generally a more formal kind of education, but because of where Cornell is in Ithaca, New York, there was definitely an opportunity for me to get outside and explore the environment around me while like getting this formal inside the classroom books education. I would say that definitely the most formative part of my Cornell education was when I joined in an agroecology lab on campus. So agroecology is it's a methodology of looking at systems. So it's a culmination of like the agriculture, the social, and the cultural aspects of a place that can inform things that happen there. So just it definitely opened my eyes to seeing that, or recognizing, I'd say, that all of these different parts of our lives have an input and a very valid, like, a very valid just purpose and meaning that they put on, like, how we live our lives. So yeah, that kind of definitely combined this. Cornell offered me the opportunity to combine this, like, informal and formal education that gave me, like, a wider scope of, like, what I am interested in. And, you know, there's definitely more of a humanities aspect to the way that I think about the world now and then previously when I was younger, just doing straight formal education stuff. And it definitely informs the way that I think about Jamaica and just wherever I happen to be in at the moment. As a child, or in Jamaica, as I mentioned before, I was really quiet. So I spent a lot of time just, like, looking outside windows and, like, when in Jamaica, just, like, feeling the breeze of the ocean breeze just, like, blowing on me and just feeling really at peace with the world. And I think that I'm going to keep saying informal and formal education. Just combining those things really enriched my life. So yeah, that is my introduction to the environment. So I did want you guys to think about that story. The story's finished now. That story, and maybe give any kind of critiques of the story or things that you noticed. Annie, I don't know if you could look in the group chat to see.
Yeah, so if you have any, so Brittney is opening herself up here for constructive criticism on, like, what are some things that were evocative about the way Brittney introduced herself, and what are some things that maybe you wanted to know more about?
Yep.
And feel free to put those in the chat, those ideas in the chat. So Jennifer says she appreciated hearing the grade school experience, and yeah, that's something that I think was interesting too, is that your comparison and contrast of your experiences in Jamaica and here in the U.S. Carmen says she was born in Cuba and left when she was 5, and that you've given her a new way to talk about learning styles, like about learning about where you grew up. And Marianne, Dr. Krasny, asked, how do you integrate thinking about social and environmental issues? And was there anything in your story that helped you do that, to integrate the environmental, like that social and ecological thinking?
I think just being forced to, kind of, with just the classwork that I was doing and realizing that everything is connected. So while you are, like, getting this education, you're also living your life, you're also having interactions with other people. And I really understood that those interactions really, like, meant something. They were really important to the way, and, like, informed the way that we live our lives. Just, I mean, even if you think about politics, like, there are people in institutions, you know, an institution exists, but there are people who make up that institution. And those relationships between people and how people see other people definitely affect the way we see our environment. So, yeah.
Thanks. And then, so we had a couple people say they wanted a little bit more about the details of there more context in why you moved to the U.S. and how it was when you first got here. Somebody's Cornelia said she liked the story as a journey. And then Nikki is asking, do you use your story to evaluate your choices, how you approach your choices in your field, your academic field? And if so, what strategies do you use to go through this process?
Do I use it to? Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Yeah, how do you use your stories to evaluate, how do you use your personal story to evaluate how your choices in your choices in the field? So like, how does the story that you just told impact the way you are now approaching your academic choices?
So I think towards the end of my college career, I've definitely taken more courses that deal with people. So as opposed to taking lots of courses on like trees or just basic biology things, I've expanded to more like political, how people relate to one another, how people are affected by their environment, things like that. So just making an effort to educate myself, I think. And also, I think it's still that recognition that we are all connected and everything is connected. So it's important to have or make an effort to understand others and where they are coming from. So, and I think I put that in the kind of storytelling that I do, as well as I see it in the kind of storytelling that I see other people do. So that's a big reason why I wanted to do this webinar also, because I've heard really good examples of storytelling by others that they then connected to the work that they do. And I think it's a really beneficial option for people who'd like to teach. So.
Thanks, Brittney.
Yep. So I think, let's move on. I wanted to talk about what the components of a story were and just the differences that are present in the act of storytelling as opposed to very regular information giving, teaching. So the things that, the components of a story that I think are present are you're giving information about yourself. And I do think that allows for you to connect with whoever you are talking about, because definitely people having an idea that you are like also a person who also lives life and, you know, has their own struggles or their own like connections with various, you know, parts of life. I think that's really beneficial. And I think that can work with children and young adults and older adults. So I think it's kind of a really good, I don't know if I want to say equalizer, but just a very good way to connect with people. And I think when you connect with people, there's like a larger investment made in those who you're teaching to be invested in what you're telling them. So, yes. So I've looked at some of the literature on storytelling, and it is definitely a valid thing that people have been looking at for quite some time. Some people have said that it promotes learning, motivations, and improves the learning performance of students. Others have said that it can enhance memory and help interaction between students. But I think I wanted to take the time to have you guys think about your own, think about telling your own story. So I think if you didn't already bring a kind of story that you wanted to tell, during this webinar, we can use the example of what you've done today and how that connects to the environment. So I think I'm gonna ask that Annie put you guys into groups to possibly do that kind of discussion. I think now would be a good
I'm
time.
muting myself. Yeah, so we have, we're going to put you into breakout rooms. And while I'm doing that, Brittney, can you just repeat repeat what you want folks to do?
Yes, so I'd like you all to just like practice or try for yourself telling a story to your peers who are in this webinar with you, and an example of a topic for a story that you might tell is what you've done today, like the little activities that you happen to have done before this webinar started, and how that connects to the environment.
Okay, so I'll be putting you into breakout rooms with 3 to 4 people per room, and you'll get an invitation. And please accept that invitation once you when you see it pop up, and unmute yourself. Or if you can't unmute yourself, you guys are free to. You can also always use the chat. So I'm about to do that. Ready? Okay, you should be receiving invitations now. Okay, if you haven't accepted your invitation, can do so. I'm gonna probably move some folks around. So a few people who haven't accepted their invitations yet. Jace, Jackie, Fawn. Did you guys get an invitation? All right, so I think we have several folks who still haven't accepted invitations. If you could go ahead, there should be a little pop-up that you accept. So for the folks who are still here and haven't accepted their invitations, can you unmute yourselves or put in the chat if you're actually listening in here right now, or and we can have a conversation here? Okay, Celeste, that's fine. Let me know if you want to unmute yourself and you and I can chat, or if you're just experiencing technological difficulties. I'm sorry about that. Hey, Brittany.
Yes.
I was just popping in because I forgot to tell people how long you wanted them to do this. So I was popping in to see about that.
Mm-hmm. 5 minutes.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay. So Michael and Utpala, if you're just joining us, we're doing some small breakout rooms right now where people are talking or sort of working on their own stories. I'm going to bring people back in a couple minutes, so I think I'm not going to assign you to one of those rooms because by the time you got back, or by the time you accepted the invitation, I'd be bringing people back anyway.
Okay.
right. All right, I'm going to close the rooms. All right, should have most people back in a few seconds. Okay, thanks, folks. It's always the breakout rooms are always like sci-fi technology to me. I think they're kind of fun. All right, take it away, Brittney.
Yes, so I hope you guys all had some kind of good conversation or practice in telling stories. So let's share screen again. I was wondering if any of you guys wanted to maybe talk about some of the things that you talked about in your small groups.
You want people to put that in the chat, Brittney?
Sure, yeah.
Any reflections on folks on the stories that you heard, or thinking about how you might tell a story?
Or any kind of like methods.
Well, I'm not sure, this is Mary Ann from Cornell, and I'm not sure this addresses your question, but what was fun was I was with Cornelia, and she was in a MOOC, the first one I taught, Civic Ecology, about 3 years ago. And so we actually had a story of reconnecting during our, as Annie put it, our sci-fi little breakout room. But I mean, Cornelia has also a great story that I remember back from that MOOC about how she's worked for actually years about trying to preserve a particular area of land in where she lives. And I don't know if she wants to share it or not, but also now how her more recent story, how she's sort of changing her position after having led this huge effort for many years.
Oops. Thanks, Marianne.
This is Cornelia. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, hi. I just wanted to, I do use this story of saving this piece of land. It's 19 acres. I like to say I'm saving the world 19 acres at a time. The group is called the Gateway Nature Preserve, and basically we were able to convince foundations and city people to actually this 19 to fund the purchase of this 19-acre site, as opposed to having it being broken up by commercial development. And we, the story that you actually can preserve land is very powerful, and the idea that one person can be motivated to take on something like this also resonates a lot, especially with college age people. So that's my story.
Thanks, Cornelia. That's a lovely story. So I see in the chat, Sophie has a story.
Hello?
Oh, yep.
Hello.
Carlos?
Hi. Yeah, I'm sorry you don't have a a visual on me, but I do want to share with the three people that were in my group that I had the good fortune of hearing about Carmen in Cuba and Barb in Hawaii, and speaking on experience at the North Pole or the High Arctic, to see and hear the importance of the indigenous people on all three sides, and also the diversity of places brings the climate changes to a more universal subject rather than just a local.
Yeah, I think that Sophie's point in the chat that she spoke with people in Southern Alberta, or that she's from Southern Alberta and spoke with Nancy in New York, and that through their stories they found that they shared some common experiences. And so I think that's Carlos, maybe that speaks to what you were just saying, that the stories are a way for us to find those common experiences and think about our commonalities.
Correct.
So did anyone else want to share maybe, or do we want to wrap up and say like what we've learned from this experience, what we maybe wish was a part of this webinar? I am definitely open to suggestions.
First, this is Marianne again from Cornell, and this is the first webinar I've been on in a long time, and I'm really glad I came on it. And thanks, Brittney, and thanks to Annie for being in the support column. And I think storytelling is obvious. Like, we have a lot of people on, and it's obvious something that really interests people. So it might be fun to hear about what else, other webinars or other things we might do. Maybe Annie wants to share about your story mapping project idea. And then also, I think stories of connecting through these webinars or something, or other ways, might be something we would consider also. Just because it's been so fun for me to connect with some students I remember from MOOCs way back.
Yeah, I think it would be really nice now to hear, because I think we have people with lots of experiences from a really diverse range of places geographically. So, okay, so first of all, it's nice to know what you all use, like whether you currently use stories in your professional life and how you use them. We've had a couple questions. If you have questions about, I think Nikki earlier on asked about how you might engage students in storytelling. So if there are ideas or questions related to how to apply in a professional environmental education practice. And then, as Marianne mentioned, I had ideas for future webinars. I have become a little bit fascinated with story maps. Does anybody use story mapping in their professional world, or not? Or has anybody participated in a story map?
I would like to know about story mapping. I work with international students teaching them English, and I was hoping to know more about that. I just heard about it on this website. Also, I'd like to say to Marianne Krasny, I am a master gardener from New York State, from Cornell. We're in Chautauqua County, and nice meeting you.
Oh, great to have you, and thanks for introducing yourself as a master gardener. I've really enjoyed getting to know a lot of master gardeners on the climate change course. So I'm going to pull up. So story maps I think that ArcGIS have like a trademark on story maps, but there are ways that you can do them without having to know GIS. So my computer is freezing up and I'm not able to get to where I wanted to navigate to. But if you Google or search for ARC or Esri, ESRI, story map, then you will. Oh, okay. Thank you, Marky, for putting that in the chat. There's a link in the chat now. So story maps are a way to, you can, for example, on, and some are just points on like a map of the world. So one way that we could use them to illustrate stories in our massive open online courses would be to just have points on the map where our students are from, and then when you click on that point, for example, an image and that person's bio or a story of their experience or of their work pops up. And so they're interactive and visual, and you combine, there's, you know, these multi-layers of written and visual and actual map there, so that you're kind of combining story with map and space and place. So there's, yeah, I wish if my, let's see. All right, my computer is behaving a little bit better now. I'm going to pull it up and share my screen so that you can have a visual example. But I think people are using them for planning processes, or for just illustrating stories of their community, for illustrating changes in their communities. Okay. Going to share my screen. Oops. So this is the Story Map website, and I just pulled up one from the Anacostia River, which is in DC, or runs through DC in Maryland. Hopefully it will pull up. It's taking its time thinking. But I guess while we're waiting for this to actually load, does anybody else want to share in the chat how they employ stories? There we go. In their work. Okay. So this was put together on Esri's site. And here's a picture of the Anacostia watershed, and then you can navigate to different chapters. Or so here are like little waypoints that you can click, and there's a picture up there, a picture down here. So you can see how that works, and you could have text in those spots to actually tell a story about each of those areas. Some of the templates that they have a spot over here on the left-hand side where you have a narrative. And then there are some that I've seen that have where you have the base GIS layer, and then to map change, you can like slide. So let's say you had an image from 2000 and there's been a lot of erosion in your area since then. And so then you have also an image from 2010, and you can slide them over to look at the change interactively. Yeah, I can definitely send the link to this. But of course you don't need the idea of a story map isn't necessarily, it doesn't have to be high tech if that's not what you can do, right? Like you can have a map of your area, physical map also, and have students use that as a way to think about their personal stories and to put their spots on the map. So I've done that with watersheds before, to have students put where they live on a physical map of a watershed and describe, and then tell a story about where they live in the watershed. Thanks, Sarah Lee, for sharing. Sarah Lee recently wrote a children's story about forest fires for the NGO she volunteers to tell at the events. Is that something that you can share with the group, Sarah? Oh, awesome. Great. Oh, okay. And oh, sorry, that was Sophie. I got confused. Sophie is also sharing a story that she uses with stewardship activities. Okay. So I think here, I'm going to stop my share. Here we go. All right, and I think we had way back up in the chat some. Okay, so Elise from NOAA in Maryland has been using a story map to pull in, oh, that's right, I forgot you told me that, Elise, photos and data for a teacher professional development workshop. That's not something you can share with, you're still working on that, right, Elise? Just going back up. Thanks, Lonnie, for sharing that about, so Lonnie has done training in storytelling for people in pain. Wow, I'd love to learn more about story as therapy. Thanks, Elise. Still in the works. Thanks, Fun. So yeah, the story map application might not work in the EE field in China, but I know one of Fun has been a teaching assistant and has helped out with the online courses, and one of her colleagues in China who's been doing that also did a more low-tech story map with her community, where they had the community come together and plot out areas on a community map, places, I think it would, now I can't remember exactly what the questions were, but you get the picture that you can do this low-tech or high-tech.
I like that idea. Most of my students are from Korea and China, other places in the world sometimes, but I think that would work. I'm going to try it out.
Great. I would love to hear how it goes, Nancy.
Okay.
Oh, so Sarah Lee, that's a good point, Sarah Lee, that you can arrange your environmental stories around a flagship species like the orange-winged Amazon parrot. All right. So any questions that you would like to raise, or ideas for future webinars, or comments for Brittney?
I actually didn't get to hear any of the stories because by the time I connected everything, this is my first time on a webinar, and I got it all to finally work. I only heard the last sentence of someone's story.
Oh no, I'm sorry, Nancy.
Anyone want to tell a story before I hang up?
Any takers? Oh, there could be an entire MOOC on storytelling for EE. That would be awesome. We have so many MOOC ideas. All right. Oh, Nancy, Nikki says she'd like to hear your story, Nancy, if you're willing to.
That's a good idea.
Well, okay, but I got it by surprise, so I didn't really have a story, but I was just saying about what I do. So recently I became a master gardener from Cornell in New York State, in Chautauqua County, which is western New York, which is nearby Buffalo, Niagara Falls, but south, and along Lake Erie. And I have a large yard, and I live with my dad. He has rhubarb plants growing from when he was a little boy from his mother for a long time. Somehow I had gotten some Jerusalem artichoke tubers, and I guess he had somehow dumped it in the rhubarb area, and they grew like crazy. So I've been digging them out and trying to find ways to eat them. I was just saying that's one of the activities that I'm doing this summer and last summer. I don't know if I'll ever get them all out, but they're encroaching on all the rhubarb plants that have been so precious to him all these years. He's 92, actually. I also said that as a master gardener, I learned more about native plants, and I brought some orange spotted jeweled weed from one of my walks somewhere, and got the seeds growing, and I have an abundance of them, probably about 500 or more plants coming up this summer. But last summer there were many hummingbirds that came to feed on them. It was so beautiful looking out my kitchen window and seeing the hummingbirds. So I'm going to try to keep some of the plants and share others. We have a plant sale coming up for Master Gardeners this Saturday, and I'm trying to get a lot of them into pots to see if anyone wants them. And I've learned a lot about native pollinators that are not honeybees, and that they're solitary and they live alone, and they are specialized in pollinating the plants. Some plants just need these special bees. And I don't know if that's a story, but that's what I can tell you.
Thanks, Nancy. So one of the things, and maybe another Nancy, there we have two Nancys on the call, just put into the chat a question about, we started to hear about the anatomy of a story, but didn't hear about all of the components. And I was hoping to hear more about successfully using stories in teaching. And so I think one of the things, so Nancy Yeager, one of the things that you talked about, or I think one of the key aspects of a compelling story is you have some conflict, right? And so there's conflict. Nancy's conflict is that she has this beautiful rhubarb patch that her father started growing, and now there's another plant that's starting to choke it out. And so there's a conflict there. It's an emotional conflict. It's a physical conflict. And so those are the kinds of, I think, besides just having a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? Having some kind of conflict and then a resolution to the conflict makes a nice story. Or Lonnie's putting in, she can imagine a great story about the solitary bees and their plight in life, right? So there were Nancy hit on a lot of different environmental related pieces of stories that you could pull together. And I just wanted to put into the chat this link to Storycorps, which is, I think it's funded through American Public Media. Maybe it's funded by its own thing. They have instructions for how to collect stories, and you can record your story through Storycorps, and it's usually, if you've heard them on National Public Radio in the U.S., it's usually 2 to 3 people in a booth, and talking about their life together, and there's been some kind of conflict, and there's been some kind of resolution. They're almost always tearjerkers. I almost always cry listening to them, but they have some nice resources there for collecting stories.
So, Annie, this is Marianne. I was wondering if Brittney maybe has any resources on the sort of components of a good story, since that was one of the questions. And I don't know that we're going to have a lot of time to get into that, but at least maybe we could post some resources or review it really quickly. I mean, conflict is one thing, but maybe Brittney has some other things.
Oh.
Brittney, are you muted?
Oh,
there you go.
I was muted. I think that I can post those resources afterwards, after the webinar. I don't necessarily have them with me right now, but I'd love to share those. So.
Okay. Somebody just posted storycenter.org. So Annie, you'll be posting this on which social media?
I'll be posting it in the course Facebook pages, but then I think I'll be sending it out to the group email list.
Okay. So everybody can get it who's on here.
Yeah.
The additional resources. Okay. Okay, great. Good.
All right. Okay, so we have somebody sorry, go ahead, Marianne.
I just also wanted to say on Storycorps, one way we used it is my kids asked their grandmother about her story, and it was really a great way for her to feel, I think, sort of, recognized, and a great way for the kids to learn about their family and talk about, because sometimes it's hard to get something, a conversation going in a family. And so the point is, you don't have to do anything professional. You can still use the app, and we recorded and we uploaded it. I don't know if anybody ever looked at it or if it's public, but it was just a great way to encourage intergenerational interaction. So that's another way that tool can be used.
And I've got one more story project that I'm posting in the chat, the Climate Stories Project, which started by Jason Davis, who was a fellow in a project that Marianne Krasny ran several years ago. But
And Carlos was a fellow also.
Oh, Carlos, you were a fellow also. Oh, that's really cool. So the Climate Stories Project, like Storycorps, also has some training and curriculum materials and a nice map that you can click through and see where people have entered. You can go ahead and just like enter your own story there, and that'll be logged on a map. But it also has curriculum materials. All right. Any last questions, or Brittney, any last? Oops, let's see. We've got one more question.
Yes.
Oh, Carlos.
Hello. Oh, hi. Yes. One of the things I did want to share, because the storytelling is so important, and again, you want to reach the younger children. And one of the things that I found when telling stories to different ages from different areas on the world, one of the things that they're using is the quotation of creation care. And when we use that in creation care, it includes not only children, but animals, all creatures, and of course the people, the elders themselves. So for us, using creation care kind of ties everything together rather than just, excluding something that the children don't really think about, meaning everyone, including the animals. So anyhow, this is just, again, if someone does use anything having to do with any type of indigenous, whether it's in Hawaii or Cuba or up north, to tie everybody in together is always important with the small children. And thank you very much for today.
Thanks, Carlos. Yeah, I like, so having the right metaphors and thinking carefully about, so the creation care, just those words kind of help frame the story that you're trying to tell. And let's see. So Caitlin's asking about any thoughts or resources on storytelling and personal interpretation and on-the-ground programming. And so we've had a couple examples of that. So like finding, thinking about a story you can tell around an important organism or ecosystem and the conflicts that arise there. So when I worked for Rocky Mountain, or interned, I interned for Rocky Mountain National Park, and developed a silly story around elk mating, because that was what was going on right then when I was in the park, and it was some silly anthropomorphizing thing about elks looking for their dates and all of the men competing for the women. And so I think I've always thought about it that way. But I think we had that story about using the parrot as the main character in the story. So I think thinking about your characters and then what you can draw from your environment as characters, or the people in your community, or symbols in your community, and then how you can, and then thinking about, okay, what's the conflict? Like what is, what's going to happen? What is my beginning? What's going to happen in the middle? And then how do I end this kind of outline? And I like Carmen's talking about eliciting stories from other people. And this is definitely something you do on the ground. Asking people to raise their hands or moving physically once the questions are asked, like who's been affected by climate change, who composts, and then you kind of come up with a group story, which is nice.
And right now there are other MOOC TAs who are collecting stories, I think. So that's, another opportunity for you to share stories. So they're supposed to be posted on a website eventually. So yeah, that'll be really nice.
Okay, Sophie's sharing in the chat. She had a series of tours. So that's nice. So there's a co-creation of knowledge there where participants on the walk are sharing their own knowledge and experiences about the sites. So that sounds really fun.
So Annie, I think you're about to go collect some stories about sustainable practices at Cornell. later today?
Oh, yeah. Yes, we are.
That's true. Yeah, we have two former MOOC teaching assistants who are interviewing students, Cornell students, as they walk by on one of our main plazas about their sustainable practices on Cornell's campus that will be used in the next rendition of our climate change course. So I'm looking forward to that. So a Jane's Walk is a thing. I'm going to have to look that up. I didn't know that a Jane's Walk is its own category of walks.
Thanks, Lonnie. Oh, I'm going to have to look into that. Thanks, Nikki. And thanks, Lonnie, for that. So, all right, Brittney, do you have any last thoughts?
You're muted.
I unmuted. No last thoughts really. I really want to thank everyone for participating and coming today for this informal talk on storytelling. I hope it was helpful in some way, or at least you got to spend time hearing other people's stories. So yeah, thank you.
Hey, thanks, Brittney. And thank you everybody for being here today. We will this was recorded, and we will be sending out the recording via email, and in that email we'll also send the resources that people posted in the chat, with some additional ones as well.
This is Marianne. I just want to thank Brittney for, you just stimulated all this thinking and sharing, which is just really incredible. So I know that you're graduating in a couple weeks. Congratulations. But hopefully we can keep talking, as a community, and that you can keep being part of it, Brittney, because this is obviously a topic that really stimulates a lot of thought and interest. So thank you. And excitement.
I'd love to.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful Wednesday.